Welcome to We Need to Talk Now, presented by A-10T. I'm Alicia J, and as always, I'm here with Ashley Nicole Moss.
Hello,
What's up,
hello,
Ashley?
everyone. Welcome,
And
welcome.
today, yes, welcome back. And today we have an amazing guest. We have so many questions for you, especially at this time of the year. Please welcome to the pod A-10 Commissioner Bernadette McGlade. Thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it and love your work, both of you all.
Aw, thank you so
Oh,
much.
thank you. Flattery will get you everywhere on this pod, but
Of
thank
course.
I know, that's right.
Our
you
mothers
so
taught us
much.
well, right? Our mothers taught us well.
They sure did. I know that's right. They sure did. But somebody who's definitely can teach us well today is you, because you have been the commissioner since 2008. Which is amazing. I mean, we're all women in sports here, and just to be doing something for that long in sports is phenomenal. The things that you've seen, the things that you've had to handle as the commissioner, and there's been a lot of change in the NCAA specifically. How have you navigated those changes as they've come in your tenure?
Gosh, Alicia, that's such a full loaded question there. I literally, I guess my first impulse would say just day by day. It's like, through the course of my career, I went from student athlete to coaching to then being an administrator on campus and now being in the conference office setting. And it's amazing how things have accelerated. And, Division I intercollegiate athletics is nothing like it was, even 10 years ago, forget talking 20 or 30 years ago. So really just being positive and really appreciating like the value to have a career in college athletics. And, every time a new challenge comes before, I think you can either, fret about it, worry about it, complain about it, or you kind of try to wrap your arms around and go forward. And that's sort of been my philosophy. And I think I've been fortunate enough, especially here at the A-10, to work with a board of presidents that have been willing to take risk and willing to look forward and try to stay competitive in every way that we can.
I think obviously one of the biggest changes that we have seen to the collegiate world of athletics is the NIL. And even 10 years ago, it was certain programs that got the top recruits and things like that. You expected it. But now because of the NIL, it's just an open playing field for so many different programs. And it's also kind of a huge competition in addition to being on the national stage when it comes to games and notoriety and things like that. Now it's coming down to dollars and cents. What has been the most challenging part around not wanting to, I guess, sell your program to athletes who should want to come play for you just because of how amazing the program is and how amazing the schools within the conference are, and still competing with the universities and the programs that are willing to put up big dollars to get the top recruits?
Yeah, I think the most important thing there is, institutions really leaning into the culture of their program. And student athletes are going to have the opportunity now to receive really enhanced financial benefits directly from their institutions, all in addition to what we know as a traditional scholarship of tuition fees, room, board, and books, which at many of our institutions is, upwards of $80,000 a year. But in addition to that, they'll be receiving NIL payments, and everyone in Division I will have that opportunity to do that. So it will require every institution to really start to lean into what kind of culture, what kind of environment, what kind of support are they building around their student athletes to be able to not only recruit them, but most importantly, with the transfer portal, to retain them.
Well, in addition to NIL, which has been huge, obviously, expansion is something that is a point of conversation for a lot of people. You've seen teams like Texas, USC making, moves and those types of things. But what are your thoughts on expansion? Because I'm sure there's a lot to speak about on that.
Yeah, and the A-10 has benefited from expansion over the course of the last decade. We've brought in institutions such as Davidson College and Loyola of Chicago, VCU, George Mason. And we've stayed really focused on basketball-centric institutions. We don't have football, and football is a huge financial driver. And so we have to really capitalize on what do we do best. And what we do best is what we have in our flagship program of basketball. So we've kind of coined the phrase of a basketball-centric league. That's the type of institution that we feel like can add value. And of course, whenever you're adding institutions, you're looking at the full profile, where they are geographically, where they are academically, where they are in their leadership and their financial stability as an institution. So, we're a large league. Right now, we're 15-member institutions. Prior to the SEC and the ACC's most recent expansion, we were one of the largest conferences in the country. We'll be 14 members next year, which is still a pretty large Division I conference. And even though we feel very locked into where we are right now, as a commissioner, I can't take my eye off of realignment. You always have to be very well aware of, is there an institution out there that can bring value? And then again, you want to maintain and retain your own current membership.
I will say, Alicia, my first sideline gig for CBS recently was at VCU, and it was jumping. All right, that place was packed. It was a whiteout. I said, okay, Virginia, stand up. I was not familiar with your game. That game was crazy. It was loud. Couldn't even hear. It was crazy, but I absolutely loved it. Obviously, it is Women's History Month. And before we dive into March Madness and all of the craziness in the best way possible of March Madness, we would be remiss to mention that you are just one of 2 female commissioners. And as amazing as it is to see it grow, it's growing at a very slow pace, if you will. With it being Women's History Month, what do you want to see change when it comes to women in positions of power throughout the NCAA?
Well, you're partially right in that when I took the job, I was one of 2 female commissioners out of the 32 Division I conferences. But, knock on wood, we've had some tremendous growth. And now out of the 31 Division I conferences, there are 10 females that are committed. So that's been really fabulous progress. There's still more room to grow, as we know. But I think, that there have been great female leaders. A lot of women that came before me, obviously, really helped pave the way, whether they were athletic directors or the few commissioners when I was selected for this job. But also just in terms of what's happened by the virtue of Title IX. And as we know, the tidal wave of excitement and acceptance and what's happening in the whole world and the environment of women's sports right now. It's exciting.
Oh, no, continue. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, it's exciting. And I do remind people think that this has just happened overnight since like Caitlin Clark. And I remind people, we celebrated the 50th year of Title IX last year. So it's been 50 years in the making, but no complaints were there, and we should enjoy this opportunity right now.
Do you think there's still a level of apprehensiveness, not just at the collegiate level, but just sports as a whole, whether it's professional, whether it's the minors, you name it, where there's a level of apprehensiveness about hiring women in positions of power even to this day?
I think there could be some degree, but I don't think that there is nearly what it is. I mean, look at what we're doing right here today with the 2 of you in your professional careers. You're sponsored by A-10T. You have this phenomenal show that is just bringing in more and more followers. And, would this have been possible 10 years ago? Probably not. But anyone that, participates, I think people are really leaning into. And of course, I am prejudiced and biased. And, you get twice as much done every time you hire a female, right? Isn't that true?
I know that's right.
No, that's right. Absolutely. Well, we talk a lot, obviously, on here about being women in sports, but specifically when it comes to being a commissioner, if there is a little girl out there, or even, somebody who's working their way up to be a commissioner, what is one thing you would tell them to do and one thing you would tell them not to do?
Well, one thing I would tell them not to do is don't listen to anyone that says, You don't have enough experience.
Mm.
Don't even apply for that job. They're looking for someone that is a veteran in the profession, because no one ever tells men that. And so I would say, don't listen to anyone that says, my very first job, I had like 5 people tell me, don't even apply for this job. That it was a job at Georgia Tech, because you don't have enough experience and whatever. And within a month I had the job. So that would be my don't do. And I think my do would be that, be willing to like jump in full, like with both feet, and accept like responsibilities, even though it might not be directly in your job description, especially if your boss or the team that you're working with, if they need help and have projects, jump in and help, because every time that you're on a larger team, you have a larger network, and you have the opportunity where many more people can see, that your skill level and what you can bring to the table. So I would say be a huge team player once you get in a position that you want, and don't listen to anybody that tells you no.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Alicia, listen, it's March. It's the best time of year in sports. I don't know if you know this, but it's March Madness for a reason. And when we talk about March Madness specifically, I think one thing that we've all noticed is this trend of the women's side of the NCAA just absolutely skyrocketing in the past few years. I mean, the numbers have come out over the past few seasons, and they just are gradually increasing, and by historic numbers. And in some aspects, beating out the men in some premier games. What is it do you think about the women currently and the women previously in the past few years when it comes to collegiate basketball that has just made it so explosive in ways we've never seen before?
I think the media exposure. The media exposure of more games and opportunities for these female student athletes and coaches and programs to literally be into the homes of everyone in America. And I think not only just mainstream media and network media, but, cable media and streaming and technology and the way that everyone's consuming sports. I think women's sports have really benefited from the technology that we are seeing, and the exposure through our media partners in the last 10 years.
Well, and something that I personally was shocked at was this is the first time that women's basketball teams are getting paid to participate in March Madness. And honestly, I was like, are you kidding me? This is the first time?
You're mad, huh, Alicia? You can't go back to school, can you?
Listen, well, yeah, I mean, I would have been cleaning up back then, but that's a whole nother story. If I had NIL, please. But literally, when I think about that being the first, what were your initial thoughts when I'm sure you knew it before all of us did, but what were your initial thoughts when you heard that?
Well, it's funny that you bring this topic up, because I was chair of the Women's Basketball Committee in 2000. That's 25 years ago. And we put a huge proposal in front of the NCAA of why the women's tournament should be getting units, financial units, just like the men's were. And this has been going round and round for literally 25 years.
Wow.
And we've been petitioning for it, and it just couldn't get momentum. And I give Charlie Baker, the current president of the NCAA, a lot of credit for finally just saying enough is enough. Enough is enough. And he streamlined that decision and really put it through the system literally within 12 months. So it really does, take a team to be able to make decisions. And as you know, everybody gets crazy when you start talking about money. And previously, the powers to be within the association didn't want to divvy up any distribution to women's basketball because they felt like men's basketball owned the corner of the market.
Wow, you just answered my question I was going to ask, is like, what was the holdup? Why wouldn't you pay? You're participating in it. Just pay. I don't understand. It's a very simple thing, but apparently it wasn't that simple because this is going to be the first time, but I am glad to see it. I mean, what'd you say? You said in 2000?
2000
was when you were, Wow.
Yeah.
That's,
And
that
certainly,
kind of
again,
brings,
the new media contract for the NCAA women's tournament
Yeah.
certainly had a big impact on that. And prior to that, it wasn't that there wasn't a lot of money coming in on the media side of the women's tournament, but it was all combined and it was all bundled up with all these other championships. And so there was no direct allocation to women's basketball. So that had to be unbundled to be able to really like get the momentum to get this passed through the Board of Governors.
Yeah, don't you remember, Alicia, a few years ago, the weight rooms that went viral between the men's tournament and
yes.
the women's tournament, and the women were like in this like makeshift gym with like one bench and like 5 weights, and the men had this state-of-the-art workout situation and they had sauna. It was just, and I feel like that was not even 10 years ago. So it's just crazy how once something happens, it really hits full speed. Emma says it was 2021, so only 4 years ago.
Yep.
Which is mind-blowing. I mean, for people who still aren't believing, there's a lot of conversations about women's sports, specifically women's basketball, and there's a lot of good and there's a lot of bad that comes with that, unfortunately, as well. There's a lot of doubters. What would you say to the people who are still doubting and saying the interest, especially when it comes to women's basketball on the collegiate level, and then more so going into the professional, is just lightning in a bottle? It's not something that is going to continue. It's all wrapped up in Caitlin Clark. It's all wrapped up in Juju Watkins. And, that only lasts for so long. What would your words be to those people who are still naysayers?
I would say go into any capacity, full packed arena to a current game right now. And those are fans that are not walking away. They are valuing those female athletes that are on the court. They are loving the experience. They have every amenity around that sporting event that you have at any other major sporting event. And I don't believe that you can turn the tide backwards at this point in time. And anyone that doesn't believe that it's, a real thing, I just say to them, when's the last time you've been to a game, and get yourself to a game?
Exactly. Well, and when you think about, all of the fans that are in arenas now, and you talked about the media exposure and how important that is, what are your thoughts? Because I have conversations like this all the time with people about women staying longer in college and that kind of being a catalyst for people to continue to follow them throughout the rest of their career.
Right.
Yeah. What do you think about that? And do you think it really has the effect?
I do. I think it's really been an asset because you can see the teams that have, real seniors and real graduate students. The fans have really rallied around. They love identifying with the superstars, whether it's the Juju Watkins or, the Caitlin Clarks. And there's a ton of others, that are less known, but they're very well established in their own communities and those own college towns. So I do think the fact that, the female athletes stay in school, they want their degrees. They're, as we know, it's a smart group. And as we extend their eligibility a little bit, we have this group of phenomenal female athletes that are coming out, and they don't only just have undergraduate degrees, they're all getting masters, and they're coming out with double degrees. And I think they have this greater appreciation for the value of being on their campus, knowing it's for a limited amount of time.
Well, I ask you then on the other side of things, right? Because men can be one and done, right? And I think that with that turnover, unlike in the women's game, it's hard to establish a relationship. You saw Caitlin Clark, she already had this massive fan base once she declared for the draft. The same thing with Juju Watkins, the same thing with Angel Reese. I mean, the list goes on and on. Do you think then, because the men's game in some aspects has been suffering to build that relationship with fan bases, because they're a lot of the times, again, they're a one and done situation, do you think, or has there been any talk about maybe changing the eligibility for the men's game as well to kind of get the benefits that the women do because they stay so long?
I don't think they'll change it because, you have the NBA, the Players Association, and, the dollars are so significant with those student athletes that on the men's side that can go pro. early in their career. But I think that you could see it, the dollars in the pro women's game haven't been there. As we know, they've been certainly at a much lesser amount. And so I think, the women are weighing their pros and cons of whether or not they stay in college the extra year or two versus on the men's side, the money is staggering. And they want to get out of, that first 2 years of salary cap and all that as quick as they possibly can. So I don't know that you'll see a change. And unfortunately, I think the transfer portal will continue to make it worse, quite frankly, because we have student athletes, especially on the men's side, but we're starting to see it on the women's side, which is a reality of success, that are going to like 4 different schools. You're watching a game on TV and they're saying, no, so-and-so. And, their first year they were at X school and the next year they were at Y school and the next year they're here at this school. So the transfer portal has changed the dynamic in that pretty significantly.
Do you see any changes that you think will be made to the transfer portal moving forward?
I don't, but what I do see is now that institutions are going to be able to provide additional financial benefits through the NIL, if the House settlement gets approved in April, I do think that there's an opportunity that institutions are going to be able to put together, I'll call them contracts for lack of a better term, that will basically, commit student athletes to institutions for longer than what the current scholarship was able to do for only 1 year.
I'm interested, obviously you were at the head of the curve when it came to the allocation of money to the women's game, although it took 25 years to get to that point. We are now at a point in women's sports where it's just moving at this rapid pace. Again, collegiate level, professional level. When we talk about the collegiate game, what are some of the rumblings, some of the conversations that you think we can start seeing some massive changes for the betterment of the women's game and just the collegiate game as a whole in the next few years?
Well, I think the game's in pretty good shape right now, but I think some of the additional advantages you're going to see is, again, women are going to benefit from the NIL as much as the men are. You're going to have student athletes that are able to command a significant, compensation for their skill of competing on the court. And I think that's going to be a real upside as far as women's athletics are concerned. And I think now the fact that there's a unit associated with the NCAA basketball tournament, you're going to see more institutions that will continue to put a lot of financial resources into their women's programs, because now they can get units that carry over 6 years, just like the men. And that's a tremendous equalizer.
Well, we're talking about student athletes, and you certainly don't have to be a student athlete to work in sports, but you were obviously a student athlete. How did it help you to, gain the position that you're in now as the commissioner?
Well, I think there's you all probably know the stat better than I do. Isn't there some phenomenal stat that like 80 or 90% of women in C-suite positions are former student athletes? We all learned it on the court. We learned how to be a good team player. We learned how to work hard, how to, win and lose, and how to rebound from a loss. And I think that, certainly being a student athlete gives you the opportunity to go through, every day's not a great day. And you have to persevere and you have to work hard, and, you can't let yourself get too down when things don't go your way. And at the same time, you can't let yourself get too, exuberant just when things go good, because either way, you can kind of fall off the ledge a little bit and set yourself back. So I think, again, whether it's even, and I'm a believer, a lot of folks say, oh, team sports really build the success traits that you need in life and business with your family or whatever you do professionally. But I'm a believer that whether it's individual sports like tennis and whatever, or fencing, or whether it's a team sport, it's an irreplaceable foundation for future success.
I wonder, I mean, obviously being a former student athlete yourself and being in the position that you are right now, you come across so many student athletes, and we all know the numbers that not every one of those athletes are going to go pro, and there's going to be a different future for them. And I just, the conversation and the reality of that is very hard, especially when you've dedicated your entire life to a sport or multiple sports, right? And I'm interested in the conversations you have with these young men and women when the reality starts to set in, like, hey, I'm not going into the draft. Like, what does that future look like for me? And, what kind of resources and just words of advice that you can provide for them and when that happens?
I think the most important thing is, like, the reality is not everyone does want to go pro. And it's just like when you're on a team sport or whatever, you might be in the starting five, or you might be the fifth player off of the bench. Like, there's a point in time, I think, as you are in your collegiate years and your developmental stages, that you sort of figure out your lane and sort of what direction you're going. And I think everyone, I talk to graduate students and some of our own student athletes in the A-10 about, what are you passionate about? What do you love? You might love playing your sport, but you also love, music, or you also love doing, broadcast, or, whether it's creative or whether it's something very structured. When I first, graduated, I was coaching at Georgia Tech, and, we were recruiting, student athletes, females, at a major engineering institution. And, those student athletes were, getting engineering degrees, and they knew well what they wanted to do. So, there's so much more opportunities, as you all know, in sports. I mean, the days where you have to be the actual athlete on the court, I mean, you could be in the front office and managing. We have a former player from Richmond right now that is the GM of one of the D League teams right here in Washington, D.C. And, her goal was to be, an employee in the NBA, and she's working herself right on up the ladder. So, I wouldn't pigeonhole anyone into only one area.
Absolutely not. We can't do that. Not in this day and age. We sure can't pigeonhole ourselves into one area. But it's Women's History Month, so happy Women's History Month. And I just wanted to know, what woman inspires you? Like, is there one woman that you would say has inspired you in your path?
Well, I would say unequivocally my mother. She, she's no longer with us, but my father happened to pass away, and she had 7 dependent children, and my sisters and I, we were, first generation college graduates, and she allowed us and kept us back in the day, a long time ago, of staying committed to our sport, and we were fortunate to get scholarships in the early days of Title IX and graduate from great universities. And, when you see individuals that just persevere and they make it work, no matter how it has to happen. And, I was fortunate to grow up in an environment where I was always told, like, you can do it. Like, you can do it. You got to work hard. Nobody's going to give you anything. Just work hard and, do what you need to do the right way, and good things are going to happen. So she would be at the top of the list for sure.
And also in the vacuum of Women's History Month, I wonder, what is your favorite memory when it comes to the women's game? You've probably seen so many incredible women play this sport up close, from afar, had conversations with them. I mean, Sue Bird, Diana Taurasi, Candace Parker. I mean, the list goes on and on. We talk about them here on this show constantly. What is one memory, though, that's like burned into your brain that you could never forget, even if you wanted to?
Well, this is a little bit self-serving, but we hosted the Women's Final Four in Atlanta, Georgia. Georgia Tech was the host in 1993. And prior to that, there was only one sellout, and that was when Texas was in the Final Four, and it was in Austin. And we were able to have the very first advanced sellout of the women's NCAA Final Four in 1993, which was phenomenal to see that arena packed. at that point in time. And, it was, the year prior to that, the Final Four was in LA, and I think they had about 5,000 people there, and it was just abysmal. And so to see that happen, and it took a lot of hard work with all of our sports committees, a lot of people committed to women's sports back in the early 90s, when you didn't quite see that happening. And that was before the 96 Olympics, when we were getting ready to host that. And that's when the women's Olympic team won the gold medal and all that. So that was one memory that is pretty special in the course of my career.
And I know you have a lot of them, so that has to be really But we just want to thank you so much for, spending time with us. We know you're incredibly busy. And it was just amazing to, hear your point of view on everything, but also just, it's amazing to be in the presence of somebody who has worked in sports for as long as you have, and in the capacities that you have, and have achieved what you have, because, we know it's not easy. It is not easy. But before we go, we could not ask you what your picks are for the Final Four.
And the natty. Give us your champion.
I know it's really, really hard. I wanted to give you some compliments before we asked, just because it's so loaded. But literally, what are your picks? It's hard for me. I've been agonizing day after day because it changes so much. I mean, it's just an amazing time in women's college basketball. But if you could give us some picks, what would they be?
Alicia and Ashley,
we're gonna hold you to them too. This is recording.
You can't be putting me in this situation. I would have to say, I think contenders for the Final Four. My one sleeper that I have that could get there, and I don't know if they're really a sleeper, I think NC State women might be able to get there. Depends on where they end up. But obviously, you've got UCLA, you've got South Carolina. I think they're probably, they're probably right there. And then it's tough to say when you've got, Texas and Notre Dame floating around out there, and nobody can ever cut Gino Auriemma out of it. So,
never.
I'm giving you a bunch of teams. Somebody's got to knock somebody out to get it down to 4.
If you had to pick your champion right now with what you have seen, though, let's forget the Final Four. Who do you think has the capacity, the facilities to win the whole shebang?
Oh my gosh. I think it might be UCLA.
Ooh.
Might be.
Okay.
Might be.
We haven't gotten that one yet. I like it.
Yeah. I'll take UCLA. I mean, honestly, we're all going to win in this March Madness.
No question about it.
Yeah, it has been.
No question about it.
Yeah, it's been just a phenomenal season. And, put your seatbelts on, because it's about to get crazy. And I'm really excited to see it. But again, thank you so much for joining us. And make sure that all of you subscribe, like, comment, and share. You want to make sure that you're tapped in for these conversations, because you don't want to miss one like the one we had today. So again, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see all of you guys next week.
Thank you.